My name is Megan Hale. I am 44 years old. I am a retired major in the United States Army. For the better part of the last 20 years, I served my country on continents most Americans would struggle to locate on a map. I have commanded a platoon under fire, written condolence letters in the dead of night, and survived things I cannot speak about. Not because I am afraid, but because some truths simply do not belong beyond the battlefield. None of that mattered on the day I sat in a California courtroom and watched my older brother rise from his seat. He pointed his finger directly at me and declared for all to hear, "She's not a real veteran." The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that falls before a storm, but the kind that follows an explosion, when the world holds its breath and waits to see who is still standing. Everything seemed to freeze. The judge blinked once. My mother lowered her gaze to her lap. Jarrett, my younger brother, shifted uncomfortably in his seat but remained mute. And I did not flinch. Do not misunderstand. It was not because the words failed to wound. They cut deeper than any bullet I have ever known. But I was ready for this moment. I had been ready for weeks. Without a word, I opened the leather case beside me and withdrew a single brown folder. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked toward the judge's bench, each step measured, deliberate. When I reached him, I placed the folder before him in silence. He opened it. One page, then another. I watched his face change. The color drained slowly, his jaw tightened, and when he looked up, his eyes had turned to steel. "No one move," he said. His voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable edge of command. "Close the doors immediately." A ripple of shock passed through the room. Before anyone could fully process what was happening, two military police officers entered through the side doors. Their crisp uniforms seemed to absorb the light. One took position by the door, the other approached the bench and received the file from the judge's hand. Behind me, I heard Malcolm make a sound, the kind a man makes when he is about to rise and fight, to argue, to destroy. But it was already too late. The room had shifted on its axis. His lawyer dropped his papers. My mother's face went white as bone. Jarrett's eyes flew open in shock. And I stood there, perfectly still. There was nothing left to dispute. I had not come to argue. I had come to end the lies. Before I tell you the whole story of that moment, let me say this. If you have ever been betrayed or wounded by your own family, yet forced to smile through it, leave a comment. I do not ask for pity. I ask because perhaps some of you have felt what I have felt. And perhaps my story will remind you that you are not alone. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The house stood on the edge of a cliff in Mendocino, its frame weathered by years of salt wind and Pacific storms. It was not luxurious. 3 bedrooms, peeling blue paint on the porch steps that creaked as if the old boards held family secrets. But it was my home. My father had left it to me in his will, and for the first time in many years, I had a place that felt truly mine, even if none of my relatives believed I deserved it. When the lawyer first read the will, I saw Malcolm's jaw tighten. He always reacted that way when he perceived an injustice against himself. My mother did not even look at me. Jarrett, as usual, stared at the floor, his refuge when the atmosphere grew unbearable. The will was simple. Our father had divided his modest estate among the 3 of us. Malcolm received the controlling stake in Hale and Sons Hospitality, the family business he had already been running for over a decade. Jared received a trust fund, the kind one establishes for a person who lacks the will to fight for anything. And I received the house. That was all. For a few weeks, peace seemed possible. By day, I made repairs, painted the porch railing, pulled weeds from the garden. By evening, I sat by the fireplace wrapped in an old blanket, listening to the wind tap against the glass, just as I had as a child. I allowed myself to believe that perhaps, this time, they would leave me alone. But in a family built upon control, peace is never permitted to last. The envelope arrived in early May, heavy with poison. Malcolm and my mother were officially contesting the will. They claimed I had manipulated my father, falsified my military records, and unduly influenced his final decisions. Every line was crafted with cold legal precision, less an accusation than a verdict delivered in advance of any trial. I read that letter 3 times, seated at the kitchen table where my father once plotted the routes for his road trips. My name, Megan Hale, appeared again and again, not as a daughter's name or a soldier's name, but as the name of a liar. They were not merely challenging an inheritance. They were erasing 20 years of my existence. There had been no phone call, no conversation, no warning. Only a subpoena and a deadline. 30 days to respond. I tried calling Jared. He did not answer. I did not call again. And then I did what the army taught me to do when the ground gives way beneath your feet. I began gathering my gear. Not weapons or body armor this time, but documents, photographs, military evaluations, deployment schedules, letters from the front lines. Evidence of a life lived and documented. I began preparing for a new kind of war. A war fought not against an enemy abroad, but against those who once bore my family name. A war in which I would stand entirely alone. Malcolm was born with a silver spoon in his mouth and a roadmap for the future already etched into his palms. From childhood, it was understood that he would inherit everything, our father's business, his confidence, his pride. He was intelligent, polished, and possessed an instinct for knowing precisely when to smile and when to demand more. He was beloved. Our mother worshipped him. And me? I asked too many questions. They never knew what to do with me. I had no interest in branding strategies or 5-year forecasts. While Malcolm sat with our father in the conference room, learning to decipher financial reports, I was in the yard with Jared, constructing forts from old blankets and drawing maps of the world in chalk upon the patio stones. Even then, I felt like a stranger in my own home. It was not hatred I felt toward them. It was simply the awareness that I had never truly belonged to their world. My mother, Caroline, was elegance rendered in human form, and with elegance came expectation. Every gesture was rehearsed, every word carefully measured, as though her entire existence served the construction of an image. For her, family loyalty meant obedience, and I refused to comply. I did not want to wear pearls. I did not want to study hospitality management. I wanted to serve. I wanted my life to signify something larger than myself. When I joined the army at 18, the resulting scandal might have shattered windows. My mother wept as though I had died. Malcolm laughed. Jarrett looked away and retreated to his room. My father stood in the corner, silent and hollow. And when I walked out the door that evening, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, no one turned to watch me go. Years passed. Combat transforms a person. Command teaches humility. Loss burns away everything unnecessary. I returned with scars, some visible, others concealed. But I did not come home seeking recognition. I came home hoping to become part of a family once more. I allowed myself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they might witness the path I had walked and offer some measure of respect. The silence at the dinner table told me everything I needed to know. Malcolm changed the subject whenever my service arose. My mother gazed out the window, as though she could not bear even the mention of the places I had been. Jarrett remained silent, drinking wine, retreating deeper into his own shadow with each passing year. No one asked what I had witnessed. No one cared what I had endured. I had become background noise in my own home. When the court notice arrived, it was not merely a betrayal. It was confirmation. They had been correct about me all along. They had never accepted me. It was not their greed that struck me most deeply. It was their cruelty. The ease with which they were willing to erase 2 decades of service, loss, and suffering, all for an aging house and a memory of our father that they only pretended to cherish. That evening I sat on the porch, resting my boots upon the boards my father had once repaired. The sea wind cut colder than I remembered. I did not weep. I did not curse them. I simply made a decision. They wanted a war. They would have won. But it would not be fought on their terms. It would be fought on mine. War teaches that emotions are a luxury. Rage, grief, fear. They serve no purpose when bullets fly. What keeps you alive is preparation, control, and discipline. The mechanisms that allow you to draw breath when everything inside you screams to stop. So I did what I have always done when the world turns hostile. I got to work. I submitted a request to the Department of Defense for my complete service record. I wrote to former commanders and unit supervisors. I spent hours cross-checking every deployment, every award, every injury report. My shoulder still ached, a warm and persistent reminder of the shrapnel I had carried back from Kandahar. But in a courtroom, pain is irrelevant. In a courtroom, evidence speaks. I did not merely wish to defend myself. I intended to become irrefutable. Yet those gaps in the documents troubled me. In several files, I discovered digital inconsistencies, dates that did not align. Nothing sufficient to prove forgery conclusively, but enough to plant doubt. Whoever had altered those records possessed skill. This was not carelessness, it was surgical precision, which meant someone close to the family was responsible. Late one night, I sat before my laptop, the screen casting pale blue light upon the walls. A message appeared on my phone. 5 words, no sender identified. We need to talk. Alone. My heart stopped. It was Jarrett. The following evening, we met at the cliff's edge near the house, where the sea hurled itself endlessly against the rocks below. The wind whipped my hair across my face as though attempting to erase something. He stood with head bowed, hands buried in his coat pockets, refusing to meet my gaze. He appeared older, diminished, as though guilt consumed him from within. I didn't know how far they would go, he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. I offered no response, only watched and waited. After a moment, he withdrew a small flash drive from his pocket and extended it toward me. You need to see this. Back home, I inserted the drive into my laptop with trembling fingers. What appeared on my screen stole the breath from my lungs. Email correspondence between Malcolm and our mother. Dozens of messages. Discussions of altering the will. Directing charitable donations through shell accounts registered in my name. Contracts with a private information technology firm hired to secretly edit my military records. Drafts of press releases, composed a full month before the trial's commencement, poised to be unleashed at the optimal moment. They had constructed the perfect narrative. Megan Hale, imposter, manipulator, family disgrace. And they were confident I would crumble. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the table where my father once read his morning newspaper and began formulating my plan. Precise, patient, quiet. They believed they understood me. They believed I would break, would disappear as I had before. But they underestimated what 20 years of service had instilled in me. One does not enter battle seeking mercy. One enters battle to prevail. On the day of the hearing, the air inside the courthouse carried an unnatural chill, as though we had been sealed within an airtight bunker moments before detonation. I wore a navy blue suit instead of my uniform. I would give them no excuse to claim I was hiding behind my rank. No medals. No ribbons. Only myself, Megan Hale, the woman they had endeavored to erase. The courtroom was crowded to capacity. From the gallery rose the murmur of whispered conversations among reporters. Malcolm occupied his place at the plaintiff's table, his lips arranged in that self-satisfied half-smile he had undoubtedly perfected during his years in business school. My mother sat beside him, a strand of pearls constricting her throat. She never once directed her gaze toward me. Jarrett remained seated in the row behind them, silent, his hands folded neatly in his lap as they always were. The judge called the court to order. The opening statements commenced. Malcolm's attorney spoke as though delivering a rehearsed monologue, a concerned elder brother, a distraught mother, suspicions regarding inconsistencies in my records, manipulation, questionable behavior surrounding a dying father. Everything had been prepared in advance, even the carefully modulated intonations. This was not merely an attack. It was a performance. And I had been assigned the role of villain. When Malcolm himself took the stand, he informed the court that I had abandoned the family and reappeared only when property hung in the balance. He asserted that I had weaponized my military service, assuming it was even genuine, to manipulate our father's pity. Then, fixing his gaze upon the judge, he sneered through his silk necktie, "She's not a real veteran." No one gasped, but the silence that descended upon that room possessed its own weight, its own volume. I did not avert my eyes. I did not blink. My attorney rose with composure, utterly unflappable. She presented the court with my service record, Verified, certified, bearing the signatures of senior officers. Photographs. Letters of commendation. Correspondence from commanding officers. No drama. No pathos. Only facts. Then came my turn. I did not utter a single word. I opened my briefcase and withdrew the folder. The same folder Jarrett had given me. The folder containing truth, honed to the sharpness of a blade, capable of severing any falsehood. I walked to the bench and placed it before the judge. No speeches. No explanations. Only a direct, unwavering gaze. The judge opened the folder and read the first page. His brow contracted. He turned to another page. His shoulders grew rigid. "No one move," he commanded sharply. "Close the doors immediately." Before anyone could react, the courtroom doors slammed shut. Two military police officers entered, composed, calm, radiating authority. One assumed position by the entrance. The other approached the bench to receive the judge's instructions. Malcolm's face drained of color. His attorney dropped his pen. My mother gripped the edge of her chair as though it alone prevented her collapse. And Jarrett? Jarrett remained motionless, but for the first time, he met my eyes. The military police operated as they always do, with precision, with seamless coordination, without wasted words. A second bailiff secured the doors behind them. No one departed. The judge did not speak immediately. He simply continued reading. Page after page, the narrative Malcolm and my mother had so carefully constructed over months unfurled before the room. First came the financial records. Charitable donations intended for veterans organizations that had never reached their destinations. The money had settled into shell accounts registered in the names of Malcolm and my mother. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, channeled under my identity. Donations I had never known existed. Their fraud did not merely damage my reputation, it transformed me into an unwitting accomplice. Then the email chains. Extended threads of correspondence between the two of them. Every step mapped in advance. The campaign to vilify me in the press. The construction of a narrative depicting me as unstable, avaricious, untrustworthy. They had rehearsed my destruction with the meticulousness of a corporate acquisition. And finally, the forged amendments to the will, drafted mere weeks before our father's death. Not by his attorney, the man who had served him for decades, but by some hired functionary in Malcolm's employ. The handwriting did not correspond. The ink remained fresh. The forgery was evident, yet its most terrifying aspect was its calculated intentionality. At last, the judge raised his eyes. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier composure. The court is now in possession of evidence suggesting the commission of federal crimes, including fraud, forgery, and obstruction of military service and estate administration. The civil case is immediately stayed pending the outcome of a criminal investigation. I did not turn to look at Malcolm. There was no need. I could feel him collapsing behind me. My mother sat motionless, her features contorted. Her lips had parted, but no sound emerged. Jarrett remained in the gallery, hands folded in his lap as they had been throughout the morning, but his shoulders had relaxed. He had accomplished the most difficult task of any of us. He had chosen the truth. When the judge transferred the folder to the officers, the weight I had carried for years simply dissolved. Not with a scream, not as a victory, but as silence. And within that silence, I encountered something I had not experienced in a very long time. Peace. Not because I had prevailed, but because I had finally been heard. Malcolm did not speak. Not immediately. He remained seated, blinking rapidly, as though the light had grown suddenly unbearable. His attorney leaned close and whispered something urgent, but Malcolm appeared not to hear. His jaw remained clenched, his fists tight, yet the strength had deserted him. The mask had fractured. My mother had still not moved. She sat frozen, gaze fixed straight ahead, hands gripping her lap with white-knuckled intensity. I studied her face, searching for some indication of what lived beneath the surface: remorse, confusion, perhaps rage. I found only emptiness. The particular emptiness that manifests when a meticulously constructed falsehood finally implodes. The judge declared a recess to permit federal prosecutors to commence their review without delay. The military police remained stationed within the room, silent sentinels at every exit. When the gavel fell, the sound resembled the final nail driven into the lid of something long decaying. I walked into the hallway alone. Gradually, the ambient sounds of the courthouse reasserted themselves, the click of heels against tile, the distant shudder of cameras beyond closed doors, the murmur of reporters clustered near the building's exit. I leaned against the wall and exhaled, only then realizing I had been holding my breath. My knees threatened to buckle, not from fear but from relief. The weight I had borne for so long was finally beginning to lift. Then I heard footsteps approaching. I turned. It was Jarrett. His eyes were rimmed with red, his face pale, yet he walked toward me directly, with confidence, without concealment. When he reached me, he opened his mouth and whispered, barely audible above the corridor's ambient noise, "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "You don't have to be." He looked down, swallowed with difficulty. "I should have done this sooner. I let them, you did it when it truly mattered." He nodded once. That single gesture conveyed what years of silence could not. I imagined Malcolm somewhere within the building, pacing, attempting to construct some version of events in which he might still appear untainted. I imagined my mother, seated in perfect posture, too proud to weep, too shamed to move. Let them remain there. Let them inhabit the silence they had once wielded as a weapon against me. They had waged war upon my name, my history, my honor. But they had overlooked one essential truth I had been trained to fight. And this battle I had already won. I did not emerge from that courthouse adorned with medals. There was no applause, no fanfare, no triumphal procession. Only the quiet sky arching over Mendocino and the familiar crunch of gravel beneath my boots as I made my way home, to the house perched upon the cliff. I required no headlines. I needed no vindication. I possessed something far more durable. I knew the truth. The investigation advanced with swift efficiency. Malcolm and my mother were indicted. Their names, once uttered with reverence at banquets and inscribed upon honor rolls, gradually vanished from boardroom invitations and guest lists. Jared maintained his silence with the press. Yet he visited me from time to time. We no longer discussed the case. There was no necessity. What required expression had already passed between us in that courthouse corridor. That spring, I planted lavender along the garden's edge. I pulled weeds from the soil with my own hands. I repaired the old swing on the porch, the one that had hung neglected since my father's time. Some evenings, I would settle upon the steps with a cup of coffee cradled between my palms, enveloped by silence. Not the silence of exclusion, not silence imposed from without, but silence I had deliberately chosen. You understand, not all conflicts leave visible scars upon the skin. Some simply clear away the debris, the accumulated weight of years, the false obligations and performed affections. They create space. The space where one can finally draw breath without obstruction. And sometimes, that proves sufficient. Because I remain here. I remain standing. And at long last, I am free.